So I am going to pass over to our next presenter, who is Margarita Moreno from the National Library of Australia, who's going to be talking about Up to Date with OAI-PMH, the daily update. So Margarita, do you want to begin?
Thank you very much. I'll just be a second sharing my screen. Okay, can you see that? Yep. Perfect. So first of all, thank you for the invitation to be part of this webinar today. I'd like to talk about using the OAI-PMH daily update to keep your holdings up to date on the Australian National Bibliographic Database and its relationship to resource sharing. Oh my goodness. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the Australian Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples of this nation. We acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land and pay our respects to ancestors and elders past and present. We're committed to honouring Australian Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders' unique cultural and spiritual relationship to the land, waters and sea, and their rich contribution to society. And I come to you this afternoon from Ngunnawal and Ngambri country. So what am I going to cover this afternoon? This afternoon's presentation will begin by setting the scene, discussing the impact the National Library's organisational redesign has had on Trove Collaborative Services, followed by a summary of the resource sharing as it stands today, and then I'll discuss why OAI-PMH, the impact experience so far, and a few points on what next. I don't think I need to talk to this group about budgetary pressures and uncertainty. It's a fact of life for most of us. However, our situation was compounded by an organisational structure that was established over 20 years ago. Although there'd been some changes, fundamentally the structure hadn't been reviewed in a long time. In the meantime, work practices had changed significantly, and technology plays an even stronger role today than it did when we first set our organisational structure. Processes and workflows had also created silos. I don't think I'm saying anything outrageous here, but it was having a significant impact on the way we worked, stifling creativity and adding churn. The library had also received additional funding over the last 5 or 6 years, which we've reported on several times, the Trove Mod project, as well as some COVID funding that we've got. That, however, as you may know, government policy doesn't allow us to employ more staff when we get these sorts of budgets. You just have to try and fit it in with business as usual. And that has a significant impact on how we might do things. This has placed significant pressure on the organisation to respond. And so the National Library Executive in July 2019 commenced a project to reorganise, to change the organisational structure. The library employed an agency to help with the process. The starting point was the National Library's corporate plan, and the aim was to build a more resilient, flexible organisational structure that brought like with like around the 4 pillars in our mission statement, as outlined in the corporate plan. And these are: we collect today what will be important tomorrow for Australia's increasingly diverse community. We connect with communities and connect communities with their national collections. We collaborate with others to deepen the national impact of cultural collections. And we build on strong foundations to maximise the nation's return on its investment in the library. Post restructure, the library now has 5 branches. Collection is responsible for collecting all materials, their cataloguing, as well as management of the collection. Engagement, which is the connect pillar in our mission statement, is responsible for engaging with the public. So it's the reading rooms, education, exhibitions, communications and marketing, and a new Indigenous engagement unit. Collaboration, the branch to which I belong, is responsible for all external relationships with the community, and it includes the Trove Collaborative Services, digitisation, including the digitisation on demand, which is the new name for our document delivery service. We also have digital, which includes all of our IT services, including the ILMS team, and finally corporate, which includes building services, our human resources training, corporate documentation, risk and project management, et cetera, et cetera. So you can see this is a significant change in the way we operate. So the collaboration branch is further divided into 4 teams with different roles. However, under the structure, there is a strong imperative to work together. Otherwise, we end up with different priorities, and that does not work well to meet the needs of our partners. So we have a partnerships team, which is responsible for liaising with partners, documentation and governance. They are typically the first port of call when you have an issue. Trove Data and Platforms is responsible for all of the data and systems we use to operate Trove Collaborative Services. Our strategy and transformation team is a new team that has been set up to develop our future strategy, review our workflows and products, and develop appropriate costing models. As you can see, these roles need to function as one for us to be able to do our work. You can't develop strategy without knowing about the partners and about the systems you operate. And we can't develop our systems unless we know what strategic directions we're taking with our services. So it's a very integrated approach that we're taking. And then finally, the last team in our branch is the digitisation team, which is responsible for digitisation, as well as I mentioned earlier, digitisation on demand, which runs our interlibrary loan services. We had just finished the redesign, basically developing our new structure and the new role definitions when COVID hit. So you can appreciate the timing, to put it frankly, was not very good. Although quite a few staff had been mirrored into their positions, we also had a number of roles that we needed to fill. So you can appreciate conducting recruitment through COVID has been a slow and, I was going to say, painful process, but it's been conducted virtually for the most part. The final recruitment process is only finished in July this year, so it's been a long, hard process. I wanted to give you a sense of the mammoth task the library undertook to restructure during COVID, which has meant that our highest priority has been to ensure that our partners have been able to use our systems and services to the best of our ability so that we could maintain business as usual. Before COVID, the library had worked with the Resource Sharing Futures Steering Group to look at resource sharing and the decisions we need to make going forward. When we set up our resource sharing systems originally, it was a relatively simple thing. We were primarily providing automated pathways for libraries to exchange requests between each other and to provide access to mostly their print collections. Most libraries had limited automation, particularly for resource sharing. Today, resource sharing environment is much more complex, and I don't need to tell you all just how complicated it can get. Library collections in many cases have moved to a digital preferred model, and contracts are can be very limiting. And whereas in the past, LAD was the centre, or Libraries Australia Document Delivery was the centre of resource sharing for many libraries, it is now just one of many pathways to fulfilment. And the previous presentation that Petra did highlights just how much it's changed for Australian libraries. As already mentioned, in order to advance resource sharing, the library set up the Resource Sharing Futures Steering Group in 2018-19. The aim of the group was to consider the options for resource sharing. One of the things that the committee developed were 6 principles that we would need to meet, that would need to be met by the new system. It would need to be sustainable, that is, covering concepts of scalability, load balancing, and committed to ongoing development, usability, easy to use, standards-based, seamless integration with other systems and services. It would need to be cost-effective. I think that one's self-explanatory. Flexible, enabling libraries to choose how to work with the system, and for the system to be adaptable to library needs as they change. Australian, there is a strong sense that we would need to provide access to an Australian corpus and work within Australian ILRS code and copyright. And finally, collaborative. We can only gain efficiencies through economies of scale, transparent processes, and working together. A key element across all of these principles is holdings, and only by ensuring our holdings are up to date can we make our systems efficient. When the library commenced its restructure, the collaboration branch had already started thinking about some of these concepts, and we'd already combined parts of Trove support with the Libraries Australia Data Services team. This meant that we'd started to think about how we could take some of the elements that we use within Trove to managing our Libraries Australia data sources. By bringing the two teams together, that meant we had cross-pollinisation of ideas, and the teams began working on the idea of using the National Libraries Harvester and the OAI-PMH to collect and update the ANBD. This is the technology that we've been using to keep Trove up to date since its inception. So it wasn't like it was new technology, but it had only been used in the Trove space and not for Libraries Australia. We'd started that process of thinking about how we might do this when Trove hit. We also had put in place a data pause in 2018, which meant that when we took the pause away in 2019, we had a backlog of data refreshes that we needed to undertake. This meant that we really wanted to explore opportunities for using a new process to be able to update our holdings on the ANBD. So you can imagine the situation we were in, wanting to test a new process, a pandemic causing disruption to our workflows, 2/3 of staff roles needing to be filled, and a requirement to continue to manage and provide support to our members. What is OAI-PMH? OAI-PMH, or the Open Archive Initiative Protocol for Metadata Harvesting, is a low barrier mechanism for repository interoperability. Data providers are repositories that expose structured metadata via OAI-PMH. Data providers then make OAI-PMH service requests to harvest that metadata. OAI-PMH is a very simple process. It has basically 6 verbs or services that are invoked by HTTP. It's been around for about 20 years, and many system vendors have already implemented this service in their products. It's an efficient system that can be set up and almost forgotten. It usually is easy to set up at the partner site, enabling OAI-PMH for the data set you would like us to harvest, and provide us with a secure URL. We initially test and add to the harvest scripts any processing instructions, feed the content to our record import service, and the records are added to the ANBD. The advantage is that it is a passive system, and you only need to be concerned if you are notified that something is not quite right. Our first project was with Koha in early 2019. It was a small library that advised us that they would like to update just over 13,000 records. And after several months of trying to meet our requirements for the record import service, we decided to give OAI-PMH a go as an alternative because we weren't getting very far. The project was a success, and our first library commenced using the service to refresh their holdings on a daily basis. Then in early 2020, Public Libraries Victoria contacted the library to advise that they needed to make changes to their ILL system, and that the majority of libraries would move to using LAD as their interlibrary loans management process. However, their holdings and the majority of libraries, had not been adding their holdings or refreshing their holdings regularly on Libraries Australia. So that meant that we had approximately 49 libraries that we needed to update their holdings in a relatively short period of time. The RIS service has some issues in that there is a requirement to receive files of records and be able to test them repeatedly until we're confident that the data is being ingested appropriately. So you can appreciate with a time frame of 3 or 4 months that the usual risk processes were not going to be sufficient for us to be able to update these holdings records in the timeframes that we had. Therefore, we started working with the vendors one by one until we established OAI-PMH for the majority of libraries, and we were successful in updating their records very efficiently. So we have at the moment a number of systems that we've tested and we're ingesting on a regular basis. They are Spiders, Libero, Symphony, Koha, and Aurora. Testing is underway with Liberty and Alma. Our testing with Alma is well advanced, although we do have some issues where we have multiple NUCs. And we're currently working with Ex Libris to resolve some of these issues. A special thanks to Melanie Fitter, who has been working with us to try and resolve some of these issues that we have. So far, almost all of the libraries who have been set up under OAI-PMH daily update are what we call libraries that want holdings discoverable. They're not too worried about the perfection of individual bibliographic records. They tend to be, for the most part, public libraries with big collections that rapidly turn over. New items coming in all the time and old items being weeded. Yes, they still add new records to the database for their unique collections, often local history items, and sometimes they are the first to put a record on the database. But they're not doing a lot of work value adding to existing records, and they probably don't have many cataloguers on staff, if any. They're looking for discovery over amazing and long-lasting metadata. For this group, Trove support has been adding holdings to existing ANBD records. But if the record has slight bibliographic differences, we've not been adding these. When a new item comes through, it is added to the ANBD in its entirety. This is much easier to set up, and no one has to look over records each time they're loaded. The risk of data corruption is also minimal or non-existent. Libraries that actively catalogue is the other group we've been looking at to work with, and this is where Alma libraries sit. We're seeing these as university libraries, special libraries, national, state and territory libraries that employ professional cataloguing staff. At any given time, you're adding a decent number of brand new records to the ANBD for the first time and spending time enriching the bibliographic fields of existing records, adding subject headings, creating linked data, that sort of thing. You're also more likely to have multiple libraries or NUC symbols. For this group, Trove Support is aiming to use your data to update both holdings and bibliographic data with almost no filter. This allows libraries to share their expertise, changing existing fields and upgrading records as specified. But remember, with great power comes great responsibility. This group needs to make sure they're sending clean data because they're much more able to cause data corruptions. That's why we're currently spending time investing in a generic set of processing rules, which will mean we can do the initial setup and cut over to OAI-PMH in a matter of days. Come December, we hope to have finished testing, and next year we'll be reaching out to Alma libraries to move you over to OAI-PMH daily update. So what next? We're hoping OAI-PMH daily update will be established for the majority of contributing libraries during 2022. OAI-PMH enables us to ensure holdings are kept up to date on a daily basis. It requires little maintenance and it's set and forget for the most part. Therefore, we believe it is a better way to go than the current RIS process. We want to continue to grow the libraries using this process to update their records on the ANBD. We couldn't have moved to so many libraries so quickly to OAI-PMH without the support of system vendors. And we will continue to work with them to ensure this work continues. What does this mean for your library? As you've seen the list of libraries that we already harvest from, if you have one of these systems, contact us and we can start moving you to OAI-PMH. If your system isn't on the list, check with your vendor to see whether they support OAI-PMH and then let us know. We're happy to work with them to make it happen. However, with the automation of contribution out of the way, we'll be turning our attention to holding statements with a focus on interlibrary loans and document delivery. We want to work with the community to establish a set of statements for use on the ANBD, which will make clear what the options are. What we're thinking is perhaps something like available for ILL, not available for ILL, available for document delivery, electronic copies only, interlibrary loan document delivery contract restrictions apply, available to consortial members, etc., etc. So this is something that we're exploring and we will want to explore with you in the new year. This being a resource sharing seminar, I can almost hear you say, well, OAI-PMH enables us to advance one aspect of resource sharing, updating our holdings, but what about the systems? LAD, what's next? Earlier in my presentation, I spoke about our new structure and the work of our teams. Since the beginning of 2021, our strategy and transformation team has been working to gather information and data on our services with a view to developing our roadmap for the future of Trove Collaborative Services. This has meant developing blueprints of our services and processes, as well as gathering information from members. As you may already know, we conducted a partner survey in the first half of this year. And then we focused on understanding our partners' needs. Then based on these findings, we held, focus groups and were convened to further explore the insights from the survey. Internally, we are working through all of this to develop a strategic direction for Trove Collaborative Services and how the services are delivered into the future. We expect to be able to share more on this in the new year. This concludes my presentation. However, I'm very pleased to advise that my colleagues, Julia Hickey and Cameron Atkinson, have written a paper that will be presented at the VALA conference next year that will provide much more detail in terms of OAI-PMH. Many thanks, everyone.